chair. Shut up. Put your hands behind your back. Don't talk or I'll get you. If you scream, I'll shoot you with a .44 Magnum. It'll take your head clean off. Not a word. I'll see you in the dark.
The following is a narration in a scene as it happens, and is not Detective Frank Allen speaking. Rain pounded the roof of the house. The attacker bound the victim tighter, who he had kidnapped. The victim's name was Shane, a 43-year-old Caucasian male. Inside the attacker's home, Shane was ordered to sit on a chair in a large, completely empty carpeted bedroom. The attacker secured another knot from Shane's wrists to the back of the chair with rope. He stuffed a pill down Shane's mouth and made him swallow it, walking out of the room, leaving the light on. The door shut as Shane began to feel dizzy. He struggled with the knots, moving his arms, trying to free his hands. But the knots were too tight. His head hurt from the blow that he'd suffered. He remembered being shoved in the back of a car, his hands tied, his mouth stuffed with a rag. It had been about 10 p.m. when he was struck while walking his dog. The room began to spin as he slowly lost consciousness. Sometime in the middle of the night he woke, lifting his slouched head as his eyes began to focus. A street light from the window seeped through the blinds, providing some light. It was still raining outside. The lights to the room had been turned off, though. Terrified, he wiggled his wrists to no avail. The door to the room was now cracked. A dim light from the hallway was on, illuminating a pair of large eyes at the door. Shane's heart sped up. "Hey man, just let me go. We can go straight to the bank right now. I'll clean out my account for you. You can have everything I got." The attacker stood behind the door silent. Shane could see an eyeball blink. They were scary eyes that were filled with lust, wonder, and excitement, and madness. They were the eyes of a rabid animal in human form. Shane began to feel dizzy and sleepy again. The last thought before he went out was, he wondered just how long those eyes had been watching him as he was sleeping on that chair. He woke again an hour later. The door was slightly open now, the light from the hall still seeping in, illuminating the attacker who was now inside the room, next to the door. He stood stiff, his gaze fixated. Shane could now see his face. The man had taken off his rain mask that he had wore earlier. What Shane saw nearly made him scream, but he remembered what the man had warned. Again, he shifted in the chair, trying to free his arms. The man grinned wildly. Shane felt sleepy again, and the room began to spin. Out he went. Another hour went by before he woke again. He lifted his head to see the attacker halfway across the room now, much closer to him. The man was still stiff, just like a statue, but this time he was hunched over kind of like a wild animal, in an awkward position, his mouth open, baring his teeth, his eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. "Dude, what the fuck? Just let me go, man. You can have all my money." But the attacker put a finger to his mouth, motioning Shane to shut up. He had on green army pants, heavy-duty mountain climbing boots, and a plain white t-shirt. His teeth were as white as a sheet of paper, but his eyes were red as if he hadn't slept in a while. He was an ordinary-looking guy, even handsome, but at the same time was the scariest thing that Shane had ever seen in his life. Once again, Shane began to nod off. The more he concentrated, the sleepier he would get. He dozed off, watching that wild facial expression and bizarre stance. Nearly an hour later, he woke again. His head still bowed. The first thing he saw was the attacker's boots in front of his own. He looked up to see the man standing directly in front of him now, watching him. Slobber dripped from his mouth. His eyes were wider than ever, and he wore a grin that made Shane Wallace scream, regardless of prior warnings. The attacker lifted his hand and swung violently, the sharp machete severing Shane's head from his neck, as blood spewed like water from a broken fire hydrant. Blood spattered the room. The body convulsed for another 2 minutes, but the man would stand there staring at the stump of the neck for another hour before his fixated trance finally broke. After another long day and late night of talking to people who we thought had good leads, I was exhausted. I had been at the station since 5 a.m. working the case, and I could barely keep my eyes open. Sheriff Lutz came in around 7 before going home for the night. He sat down and asked, "Long day?" I took off my reading glasses and wiped my eyes, letting out an exasperated breath. "Man, you don't even know. John, let me ask you something." Lutz nodded and folded his arms. "Do you believe in the afterlife?" "I do," he said. "I believe there's a heaven and a hell." I hesitated, thinking about something that I had been mulling over for the last hour. "Do you remember what the Zodiac Killer said in one of those letters sent to the editors, back in '69? He said, and I quote, 'When I die, I will be reborn into paradise, and all that I have killed will become my slaves.'" Lutz nodded. "I remember that." "Well, what if it were true, John? What if it were really true? I mean, we're never going to know, obviously, these are things we can't solve, but I don't know what's gotten into my head tonight, but what if that was true? This guy killed 6 people. I mean, he claimed to kill 30. Who knows? I mean, he wasn't the most prolific serial killer that ever lived. He's the most popular, aside from Jack the Ripper. But that line to me is disturbing. What if when we die, and there's still no proof of this, even though I'm a firm Christian, I'm a believer in the Bible, but what if when we die we have a choice? What if we have a choice to haunt people? What if we have a choice to go here or go there? And we don't just go through a light or go through a tunnel and go to heaven or go to hell. What if we have a choice to stay around and, linger around a room and haunt a house or torture people that we've killed? How bad would it be for the victims who he killed to be tortured in an afterlife of never-ending terror and just horrors? Lutz looked at me like I was crazy. "Well," he said. To answer your question directly, Frank, if it were true, then that would probably be the scariest, most disturbing thought I'd ever have. You're really letting this guy get to you, aren't you? He's the scariest man that I've ever went after, John. He is essentially the boogeyman.